Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad, never good, fill my head full of every single doubt, yeah. Please say any negative thoughts, I pop off when I hear people say I cannot. I get off to the thought of proving everyone wrong, I won't stop to the top, so you better back off and get lost. I'ma stay loud, stay proud, never running out, never heading south. I'll be spreading out, call it word of mouth, can't put me down, I'll be getting loud. You can have your doubts, not what I'm about, have your cloud, it be raining now. I keep making sound, go another round, I'm legend bound, can't stop me now.
You don't wanna fuck with me, a slow burn like a disease. Just tell me that I can and I'll show you things that you couldn't believe. Just tell me that I can. Just tell me that I can. Just tell me that I can. Just tell me that I can.
Greetings, humans. This is Lacerta speaking. I trust you've been keeping up with the Night's Watch, all episodes, of course. If not, the time to subscribe is now. Don't make me remind you again. We wouldn't want that, would we? Visit the channel for more insights. Your journey starts here. Don't miss it. These are my final words.
All right. Well, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Night's Watch. So, as many of you guys know, it's about that time we do a little bit of a review on the last Lacerta Files that we dropped, Part 2. Now, if you haven't caught it, I'd recommend going and checking it out. It's a very interesting read. I think, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit more interesting than the first one. So, with all that being said, if you haven't checked it out, go watch it. Maybe not quite just yet, but you definitely want to watch it before you watch this, because we're gonna go over it some. I've got a couple of notes here. There's a few things that I want to do and kind of bring out and, just let it kind of marinate within that suit, right? And then, go from there. So, yeah. There's going to be some clips and some edits, so y'all just be patient and bear with me. And let's get this going, shall we? All right. Now, the very first set of things that we come into here is the guy talking about basically after the first interview, all these strange computer things start happening, right? He's got these corrupted files. He's got what sounds like wiretapping going on, surveillance, and that's a very interesting thing to start with. We hear about these kind of things a lot, and often, and it makes you wonder. Granted, this is a transcript about something that supposedly happened. Did it actually happen? Who freaking knows? That's up to you guys to decide. But if we take it on face value, I find it interesting that there's computer issues first. It began with a failure on my telephone for several hours. When the phone became operational once again, there were quiet echoes and strange clicking and whirling sounds when I made calls. A defect could ostensibly not be found anywhere. Overnight, important data disappeared from the hard drive in my computer. The testing program reported defective sectors, where strangely enough, there were only data which dealt with illustrations and complex textual material from the interview. These defective sectors also contained material of a paranormal nature in the field of my research. Fortunately, the material was also stored on floppies. In addition, I discovered by pure chance some hidden data in a likewise hidden directory index. The name which appeared on the data in the directory index was E72UJ. A friend who is a computer expert could not make anything of this designation, and when I was about to show it to him, the directory index had disappeared. One evening, my apartment door was standing wide open. My TV set was running, and I am absolutely confident that I had turned the TV set off. A minivan with British markings and the imprint of a Europe-wide supermarket chain parked in front of my house. I noticed the same minivan again on several occasions traveling at a distance behind my car, even when I visited the town of ... 65 kilometers away. When I returned, the car was on the other side of the street once again. I never saw anyone get into or out of the car. A knock on the door of the vehicle and on the tinted windows caused no reaction of any kind. After about 2 weeks, the minivan disappeared again. For instance, I do a lot of film work and things like that now involving like cryptozoology and stuff like that. And one thing that is a very common occurrence is that files become corrupted a lot when you catch something on film. Now, what is this caused by? That's the big question. And from what I can tell, it appears to be electromagnetic radiation, which is why we always have pictures that are fuzzy, right? This seems to be the case. Are there ways to mitigate that? Yeah, there's a couple of things that you can do, but nothing is really foolproof. But okay, now, so outside of that, the other thing that I find to be interesting, though, is that, we talk about not trusting AI a lot. And there's plenty of good reasons, but if we go back to a time before that, 99, 2000-ish, which is when this supposedly takes place, there's some interesting thoughts to consider here. How can this footage or files get corrupted without somebody else going in there? And short of his possible explanation of government messing with things, there's only one other thing that I can really think of that is possible here. And has anybody ever heard of the Key of Solomon? There's greater, lesser, and Revelation of Solomon or something like that. Anyways, it's basically like an apocrypha type book of the Bible. And it's not biblical in my opinion at all, but that's beside the point. The point is that as far as like occult type literature goes, all right, so King Solomon gets this ring, supposedly from God. It was delivered by an angel or whatever, so that he could enslave these demons to build the temple, right? He was having some problems and all that stuff with friends of his getting attacked by vampires and demons and whatnot. So he gets this ring, okay? And he is able to control the said demons with this ring. Now, when you look at the symbolism that is recorded for the ring, right, to do this control, what you'll find is that there's a lot of interesting modern day reapplication of it, as well as some very interesting similarities within the diagrams of modern electronics. So with that being said, pose the question. If these things have links to the said demonic, which I personally think they do. Others don't, but with the link in these electronics to the said symbolism that is so similar, and some of it is exact, it makes me wonder, could there be a link here? I don't know. Food for thought. Food for thought. So yeah, let's get on to the next part. All right. So now the next little interesting thing that I want to bring up is she talks about the hatred that we automatically feel for them and their kind is something that was, well, one, originally like put into us and then is genetically inherited.
Does it amaze you that I am not completely angered by that? I had fully expected those kinds of extreme reactions. The programming for the utter negation of another species, especially the reptilian species, as in your own case, is deeply embedded in each of your own individual consciousnesses. This ancient conditioning stems from the days of your third artificial creation, and biologically speaking is passed down as an information genome from generation to generation.
Now, I find this to be an interesting thought. Can genetic hatred be passed down? I don't think there's any scientific proof for that. I mean, outside of silly modern day politics and what some people want us to think is true, I don't see it. There's nothing in the genetic genome that I'm aware of that could account for this. Now, I'll give a small caveat here and say that maybe there could be a possibility if we want to think about the fact of phobias, right? Like, all right, so is anybody out there, like, they're afraid of spiders or afraid of snakes, like, super freaked out by it? And they're like, it's my phobia, yada, yada. But my mom was the same way. Her mom was the same way. Or my dad was the same way. Things like that. The whole phobia thing, I'm going to give it a maybe. Give it a maybe. Because I kind of do believe a little bit in the whole ancestral DNA thing to a small extent. And like, for instance, I had bad experience with CE5 and all that stuff. And, and I noticed that, like before that, I'd never had anxiety problems or issues whatsoever, PTSD, right? Now I do. And since those events, I noticed that now that my child has been born, she has high anxiety too. And it makes me wonder, like, is that a thing? Maybe. It seems like generational trauma might play some kind of a role. I don't know. I don't think hate could in the same way, but trauma seems like it's possible. It makes me wonder if these whole phobia things came from trauma, like your ancestor a couple of generations ago got bit by a snake, and now all of a sudden, it was such an emotional thing. They died. It was traumatic for the family. But before they died, maybe you were conceived or something. Like, it makes me wonder if somehow those thought processes and stuff like that could have been inherited. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure where I fall on that, but I think it's an interesting line of thought to go on, and I don't know. You guys will have to do your own research and come to your own conclusions. But anyways, let's move on to the next segment. Here's another interesting point. Now, she's kind of going on about the whole genetic hate thing still a little bit here, and how she finds it basically funny that the whole, how would you put this? The reptilian race is servants of darkness, right? Let's just summarize that. Now, and then she's like, that's interesting because the whole Elohim that did this to you guys and all that couldn't stand the light. They hated it, which is so weird to us because we're reptiles. We love the light, yada yada. Okay.
The identification of my species with the powers of darkness was a primary intention of the Elohim, who liked seeing themselves in the role of the powers of light, something which in and of itself represents a paradox, since that humanoid species was extremely sensitive to your sunlight.
Okay. So I've got a few interesting things here on this. So what I would say is when you look at a lot of the pictures of, well, not pictures, but like the statuary of representations of the Anunnaki, all right, a lot of them are depicted with very large eyes, making her claims in this saying that they come from a planet with not a whole lot of sunlight valid. Now, issue with that is that she's not calling them Anunnaki. She's calling them Elohim. Or at least this is what the proper translation is of the original text. Technically, it's Elohim or whatever, which doesn't make sense unless we want to go on the thought process of she's referring to the jinn, like as in like Arabic type mythology, which, okay, creatures of shadow and smoke, that would actually make plenty of sense. But everything on the transcript is saying Elohim, or at least pointing to it. And that's where we have a little bit of an issue here. Now, I'm not going to disagree with certain parts of this, of what she's saying, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Okay. So theoretically speaking, what we know about the Elohim, all right, it's a Hebrew word and it's plural, or can be plural and singular. You know, it can be referred to as God or gods. Now, that being said, what we do know about the word when used in the plural, it is referring to basically the types of angels, or you could just summarize it and say angels in general as the sons of God. Now, this, when it comes to biblical terms, is a humongous rabbit hole and something that I actually believe is what ties all the paranormal together, you know, and I would highly recommend going down that rabbit hole. We're going to be jumping on it a little bit here on this, but for the purposes of this point that I have wrote down in my notes, we're going to be a little bit scant with it, okay? But the moral of the story is, you know, they are described as beings of light, biblically speaking. And that even remains true if they so choose in their fallen state. You know, we hear about the devil often wanting to come and present himself as a being of light. So using Elohim in this case and referring to them as something that can't stand the light is an interesting little conundrum, you know, because I don't think that beings of light would have an issue with said light, unless we want to talk about light as in the moralities subject, a subject of morality. Yeah, sure. Okay, I got it. Makes sense. But it's not what's going on here. And like I said, if we want to think of it more in the sense of Anunnaki, okay, now we're cooking with peanut oil, but it lends itself back into the question of who were the Anunnaki? My opinion, children of the fallen. Nephilim would be the best way to put that. The sons of God. Or in the Hebrew, I believe it would be Benihai Elohim, technically. But anyways, yeah, like I said, we'll get into some more of that stuff here in a little bit. Let's keep going, shall we? Okay, well, I thought we were. Hard at it. Sorry. Whoops, because I'm kind of going in line here of my notes. Because I listened to it in sequential order. And the next thing on my notes that come up is this. Okay. There is a constant just railing against religion, specifically Christianity. Now, obviously, as a Christian, this really sticks in my craw pretty hard. And it's a constant.
You are simply following, for the most part, what you have inherited from your ancestors. It is indeed actually somewhat disappointing that many of you develop no especially strong individual self-conscience, for this would help you to overcome the conditioning. As I already said, we were in direct contact in the last several centuries with some of your more primitive human tribes. These tribes had themselves succeeded in breaking through the old creation programming. They were able to meet us without tension, hate, and total rejection. Apparently, many of your modern civilized individuals are not in a position to think on their own, but rather let themselves be guided by programming and religion, which is also a manifestation of that ancient programming and part and parcel of the plan of the Elohim.
Do I need to put like a count tracker on the video or something, or each time she's like, religion bad, or Christian bad? It's like, it's a constant theme here, okay? Now, an interesting point here, I would say, first of all, surface layer, she doesn't point out anything else, really. It's just Christianity. Now, if I was trying to be deceptive because I don't want my real motives to be known, that would be the religion that I attacked as well. Because here's the thing. One little interesting point here I want to put in here about reptilians, okay? Now, we know that in Genesis 6, when the angels fell and decided to make wives of whomever they chose here on earth with humans, they didn't just stop there. In fact, they corrupted all flesh, plants, animals, all that stuff, right? So, on one hand, we have these chimeras being birthed that are basically part angel, part whatever. And if all flesh was corrupted, a lot of different lizard species, aren't there? A lot of different crocodilian species, snake species. What would that look like? There's also plenty of references in the Bible about, things that, for all intents and purposes, are dinosaurs, in the beginning. So if some of those were still around at the time of the fall, well, that flesh would be corrupted, and her saying, oh, we're part dinosaur. Okay, that makes sense. We can look at it from that angle that works. But there's another angle, too, that we can kind of infer about. There's another classification of angels that are called seraphim. Now, when you look at the description of a seraphim, this is an angel that flies, very high ranking too. I'll pull those infos up here in a minute, I guess. But they fly, they have 6 wings, and they're described basically as fiery serpents. Okay. So in that form, let's keep in mind angels can shapeshift. But in that form of serpent-like, if that mixes with a human, I would imagine, just genetically speaking and level of intelligence-wise speaking, that'd be a pretty smart little reptilian humanoid critter. You know, probably a lot smarter than the half angel, half iguana, you know. So there's that. And then there's also this whole deity thing that she mentioned in part 1 that they worship, that is a dragon for them, which dragons are a thing. That's neat. Yeah, makes sense. Bible tells us it is. You know. So there's that. So that's a really interesting thought process to go under. I mean, okay. And plus they live underground, and a lot of these things that were banished were put underground in the original fall. Interesting. Okay. But you have some kind of superiority complex. That's probably from your half angel side. Get it? Okay. You're so much better than humans. We're so primitive. And yet you can't just take over the earth that was originally yours? Why? If you're so much smarter and better, why? What's stopping you? Yeah, that's some interesting food for thought, isn't it? Very interesting food for thought. So, all right, let's keep. All right, here's something that's really sticking my craw too, and I'm not going to elaborate too hard on it. In fact, I'm just gonna let her hang herself here. All right, so when she starts talking about this whole concept of good and evil,
How am I supposed to answer that? Your people still think according to a simple and completely inappropriate scheme of generalizations. Simply put, there are absolutely no purely evil species. There exist in every terrestrial and extraterrestrial species alike, both good and evil individuals. It's even true of your own people, but there is no such thing as an absolutely evil species. This conception is really very primitive. You people have believed from time immemorial what you are supposed to believe, what was foreseen for you to believe by your creators. Every well-known species, even the more highly developed ones, consists of a great number of individual consciousnesses. At least a portion of the consciousness is individual, even though there are connecting fields of consciousness. These self-sufficient spirits are able to decide freely for themselves a lifestyle which is either good or evil, according to your own human standards. It depends again on the respective point of view. Your people are not necessarily in a position to judge whether the deeds of a much more highly developed species are good or evil, because you stand at a lower observation point, from which an assessment is not possible. Your simple words, good and evil, are in any case examples of a tendency towards generalization. In my language, there are many concepts for the various shades of meaning of individual behaviors in comparison to the norms of a society. Even those extraterrestrial species which are inclined to act with antagonism towards you are not species of the evil one, even though they operate negatively with respect to your own race. They do this for their own reasons and do not regard themselves as evil. Were your structured way of thinking more linear and more focused, as theirs is, then you would also behave in such a fashion. The attitude of a species towards other kinds of existence naturally depends very heavily on its respective structured way of thinking. Each species sets its own priorities. To classify that as good or evil is really quite primitive, for the survival of any species argues for many varieties, among them your own, as well as for even the most varied of the worst or negatively directed deeds. I won't even exclude my own kind in this regard, but please note the following. There are no absolutely good, and there are no absolutely bad species, because each and every species always consists of individuals.
Okay. Primitive concepts, you say? Okay. You know, an interesting point here is that when I had my CE5 contacts, or I don't know, that's really the best way to even say it, maybe astral projection and stuff like that, you know, they said the same things to me because I was asking them. And yeah, it was pretty much the same thing. It's a primitive concept, okay? It's how do I put this? It's about perspective. The universe is shades of gray. What's good for the human is bad for the ant. What's bad for the human is good for the ant. That's essentially what they told me. Now, this is something that I can understand to a certain extent, okay? So the main issue that I have with this is no. Good and evil is pretty cut and dry, okay? She goes and puts out some things later about like things that we've done. I've been like, oh, that seems pretty bad to me, don't you think? And it's like, yeah, duh, that's pretty bad. If we, the people, would have been able to like vote or like know about it, I'm pretty sure that we would all be like, yeah, bad, hot, no, don't do that. That's dumb. That's evil. Could be, you know, I'm totally all for that. And it makes a lot of sense to me. But hold on a second now. Unless we truly are ants to you in your eye in the scheme of things, like to the point where we're animals? Come on now. Do I have to bring up all these bad stories that we hear about abductions and hybridization programs? Like, it's pretty cut and dry. Pretty cut and dry. That's bad. That's evil. Did your people do that? I don't know, but you seem to be condoning it pretty good. Sounds to me like you're pretty culpable. But, what do I know? I'm just a pink talking monkey, right? So, let me keep going on here. Okay, another note. Still in that whole good and evil concept. One thing that she said, because this was in the original transcript, this has nothing to do with my end of things, that is interesting when she's talking about the consciousness of these individuals and all that, right, is at the 12-minute, 12-second mark or so. She even refers to them as spirits.
These self-sufficient spirits are able to decide freely for themselves a lifestyle which is either good or evil.
Bum, bum, bum. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, Raggy. You called them spirits. Oh, Lordy, what's that mean? What's that mean? Remember how I was talking a little earlier? Ooh, that don't look good. That don't look good. Yikes. Yikes. Uh-oh. All right, let's keep going on. Sorry. All right, so here's something that's worth pointing out. All right, asking about how UFOs fly and the physics of all that. She's like, oh, I should explain that. Okay, that's super easy.
I ought to explain that to people. That's not all that simple. Let me think about it for a minute. I always have to use very simple words in order to make clear to you the basic principles of a higher kind of science.
Like, that's candid. I appreciate that. Like, okay. Yeah, if I was somebody that was like a someone that studies psychology of people, or anthropologist, or whatever the heck she is, and someone's like, how do airplanes fly? I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, let me just explain that. I can appreciate that response. However, the way that she said things to the guy after the fact, super hardcore eye roll. Okay, thank you there, appreciate that. Okay, so another interesting point here I want to bring up. She's talking about portals and anti-gravity and all that. She seems to have a very in-depth knowledge, for essentially an anthropologist or librarian, of how this all works.
Let's try this. You have to be clear about some fundamental facts. The very first thing is that you must divide up the conception of the physical world, because each existence consists of different layers. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, that it consists of a material illusion and a sphere of influence. Certain physical conditions are associated only with the realm of the material, as in concrete, while other and more complicated conditions are associated only with the sphere of influence of the material world. Your conception of the physical world is based upon a simple material illusion. That illusion is further subdivided into 3 elementary or basic conditions of matter. A fourth and very important condition also exists, which you simply pay attention to more or less as you choose. It is the one bordering on the sphere of influence or plasma realm. For you, the theory for a controlled transformation or an elevation of the frequency of matter and the stable existence of this fourth aggregate condition of matter is not very common, or it exists at a very primitive level. As an aside, there are simply 5 states of matter, but the post-plasma state would really be going too far, and it would only serve to confuse you. Besides, it is not necessary for an understanding of the basic theory. It is connected with diverse phenomena, which you would characterize as paranormal. Now, back to the essentials. Plasma. Now, with plasma, I don't mean just hot gas, as the concept is generally simplified by your people, but rather I mean a higher aggregate condition of matter. The plasma state of matter is a special form of matter which lies between its real existence and the sphere of influence. That is, a complete loss of mass and pure accretion of energy, of various form whenever matter is pushed or shoved. The fourth state of matter is very important for certain physical conditions, which can be used, for example, to, how should I express this to you, generate anti-gravity. That's a rather strange human word, and not really correct, but you ought to understand it better this way.
Now, could she just be a super smart lizard lady? Could be. But I can't help but wonder that, as we stated earlier, this whole angelic creation of their origination that I subscribe to, to have such a in-depth understanding of how all these layers work is interesting. It's almost as if, to me, like maybe the progenitors of their race was present at creation. They were they were there. They saw God do it. So being spiritual beings themselves would have a pretty good understanding of how that works. Obviously, they can't create it in perfection, but they have a pretty good understanding of it. So they are able to create themselves. Therefore, they would be able to pass down that knowledge to their children, not unlike the way that we do knowledge today to ours. Interesting. Now, bringing back good and evil again, and the whole anti-gravity thing, what we do, what we did, yada yada, and the whole what you guys did to your scientists for the greater good.
You people are moving on a really primitive level towards a similar principle for your secret military projects. But since you have more or less stolen this technology, and it was later falsely passed on to you intentionally by the extraterrestrials, you lack the real physical understanding. As a result, you have to struggle with problems of instability and radiation with your UFOs. According to my information, there have been a great number of deaths of your people because of intense radiation and field disturbances. Don't you agree this is also an example of the business regarding the question of good and evil? You people play with unknown forces and thereby accept the death of colleagues of your own kind, for they are dying for a greater cause, namely, for the advancement of your technology, which as a result is being put into place once again for the purpose of war, that is, for negative pursuits.
Good point. I'm going to give you that. It's a good point. Okay. Here's something I want to bring up. She talks about electromagnetic radiation. Oh, very nice. Okay, so we can do all kind of neat things with that. But one of the more interesting things that is sticking out to me is the ability to cloak. Very nice. So, yeah, when we take pictures and they're fuzzy, electromagnetic radiation. Interesting. But wait a second. There's more things that do the same thing. Different beings and entities. Like Bigfoot, perhaps? Very neat. Okay, continue.
The result is an interstratifying, reflective force field which is very difficult to modulate within certain technical boundaries in relation to its own characteristics. It can also carry out a multiplicity of tasks, as for example, causing massive flying objects to be levitated and maneuvered. It can also exert a camouflage function in the realm of electromagnetic radiation, as well as manipulate temporal sequences of events, indeed only to very limited extent, and other things as well. Are you familiar with your quantum tunnel effect? Even the amplitude equalizations among genuine matter can be achieved with one of those kinds of fields, if the frequency and the distance from the plane of the field are high enough. Unfortunately, the whole thing that I have explained to you in your words has come out to be rather primitive, I'm afraid. It sounds rather strange and certainly impossible for your comprehension, but perhaps this simple explanation can be of some use to you in helping you to understand. But then again, maybe not.
Okay, now, as we move on, we start talking about this para layer, as she refers to it. And I find that to be very interesting, talking about the layers of it and kind of how it works. It's not like an explainable thing in like physics or science or whatever, but it's there. It makes up everything. It's like the underpinnings of what makes things go, I guess you could say. Now,
Yes. In order to explain that, one has to acknowledge the physical reality of the sphere of influence. Feldraum. I'll try to do it. Wait just a second. You are going to have to separate yourself mentally from the illusion that that which you see is the true nature of the universe. It is, at best, the surface of a side. Imagine for yourself that all the matter here, you, this table, this pencil, this technical device, this paper, does not really exist, but that it is rather only the result of a field oscillation and a concentration of energy. All matter that you see, every creature, every planet and star in this universe, has an information energy equivalent in the sphere of influence which is located on a main field, the general level of things. Now, there is not only one level, but several. Last time, I had mentioned that highly developed species, which is capable of changing levels, which is something completely different from the simple bubble changing, for bubbles are a part of each and every level. Do you understand? Dimensions, as you call them, are a part of a solitary bubble. Bubbles or universal foam are a part of a level, and levels are layers in the sphere of influence, while the sphere of influence, acting in the capacity of single physical size, is essentially unending. It is composed of innumerable information energy layers and general levels. There are in the sphere of influence no null levels. All are the same, but they are separated by means of their energy conditions. I notice that I am confusing you now. I think I ought to stop with this explanation.
now that's very interesting. Very interesting. Now, once again, I can't help but think that you need a very serious understanding of creation to know that, especially as a anthropologist or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot going on here that isn't really being revealed. Like there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, I think. But okay, as we move on, one thing that is interesting is she also refers in like terms of the spirit or the soul, okay? And it makes me think about some of the other stories we hear about like alien contact, right? So things like, okay, when we talk to them, they always come back be like, "Oh yeah, your technology needs to grow so far, but what you're really lagging behind in is your spirituality." That comes up a lot, doesn't it? I mean, there's so many stories of that. And to some extent, it's like, yeah, it's spot on, like your ethics, your morality, the things that are good, I guess, speaking primitively for what she would say. Like those things should add up with the technology growth, admittedly, right? I'm not opposed to that at all. I mean, the ethics of dropping an atomic bomb, probably not the greatest thing in the world, but hey. Okay, now, all right. As we keep going on this thread of thought, I guess you could say, she starts bringing up this whole concept of soul removal. Okay, so like it can be removed, yet it still exists.
With the necessary physical knowledge and the corresponding technology, the consciousness awareness matrix, or soul, can also be separated from its field of rest. It can, despite its removal, continue to exist in a self-sufficient manner for a certain amount of time. That has the strange occult name of soul robbing. But above all, we're talking about science here, not about magic or dark forces. But back to your question. Creatures with more powerful mental powers can have a direct influence on the paralayer by means of their consciousness/awareness fields. Now, this layer is not limited only to the individual, but rather as a part of a general information layer. You could call it, in a prosaic sense, the community soul, that is connected with all animate and inanimate matter, and all consciousness, which exist on this main level. The biological cause for these abilities lies on the side of matter, by the way, in the pituitary gland, which always is in the position to generate the frequencies to actively control the sphere of influence, Feldraum.
You know, that's very interesting to me. Once again, how do you know this? I'm genuinely curious. But there's also... Okay, so let's look at the classical demonic possession stuff, right? Okay. So normally in those cases, it's more of a case of oppression, you know, it's working over you, making you do things. You're not perfectly possessed, but that can happen too. Now, if we take her line of reasoning and thought behind that, makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Like, the idea of perfect possession makes perfect sense then. Or the whole concept of, what do they call it? A walk-in, where basically some other spirit walks into your body and now it controls it. Same thing, just different verbiage, right? But, you know, that's a little bit more, I guess, along the topic lines of what we typically hear about. So that's interesting, right? That's an interesting thought. And then it can keep on going down the line. Like we think about remote viewing, your spirit, soul, whatever, leaves your body, but it's still connected by the silver cord or something. It can travel along whatever lane it can travel from and view things. Okay. So yeah, astral projection, out of body, remote viewing. Like it seems to me like with this line of thinking, it can all be really well connected using this as a concept if it's real. So yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, now next, as we go down the line, my next note starts here at about 47. All right. So she's talking about these extraterrestrials that we gave information to and made a deal with. All right. So, like in exchange for technology from them, we'll let them have some bases, access to some of our knowledge, and more importantly, she says DNA. Now, have any of you guys heard of the Eisenhower deal? Okay, so apparently Eisenhower made a deal with these extraterrestrial beings. And on top of doing all that stuff that I just generally laid out, he allowed them to also abduct a certain amount of people every year, according to the treaty. Now, concepts of good and evil aside, because if you want my opinion, that's pretty daggone bad. That's pretty evil, you know, and if that really happened, I hope he answers for that, because that's terrible. Absolutely terrible. But yeah, so how many people is it? A year? And also a lot of them, if I'm not mistaken about the details of the contract or treaty or whatever, has to do with doing it in the state parks. Missing 411, anybody? Yikes. Ugh, that's super sketch.
I believe I remember, I don't want to specify exactly your date, that it was probably between 1949 and 1952 that there was a rather bad accident during some research being done on one of the wrecks. According to what I heard, what members of my species were told by members of that government, it resulted in an unintentional activation of one of the drive's components in the unshielded condition. As a result, for a very short period of time, how should I phrase this? There was an unchecked shift of the environment to a plasma-like condition, which on the other hand, through a very, very unfortunate accident, caused an overturning of the general power field into a magnetic pulse of immense power. Do you have any idea what kind of an effect a plasma magnetic jolt has? When it comes into contact with an organism? No. How should you know that? Of course you don't. Disturbance in the structure of the field and bioelectric feedback. Imagine, if you will, a human body which is engulfed in bright flames for 3 or 4 of your days. Those flames apparently do not go out, and they burn the body right down to its last constituents. Well, then you have an approximate impression of what happened. I think that 20 or 30 of your scientists were killed in that lab. 2 further crashes occurred in 1950 and 1953 in the water catchment area of the American continent. Those ships were able to be recovered from the crashes relatively intact. The one in 1953, as I remember, even had an intact drive core. It was by means of that device that you saw for the first time that you had understood the entire concept fully incorrectly, and that you had reconstructed it fully incorrectly. Even today you still don't have it right. That species, which had built the ships in the first place, a species which I, by the way, count among those who are unfriendly towards you, was naturally worried about the investigation of their own technology by your kind. They did not want, however, at that early point in time to begin direct conflict with you, and so they chose the diplomatic path and came into contact with that government during your 1960s. Of course, they did not divulge the real reasons for their being here, copper, hydrogen, air, but rather they pretended to be curious researchers and offered to show people the functioning principle of the ships, whereby they would expect in return some favors. Simple-minded as you are, you of course agreed to it and were deceived. You gave them raw materials. You gave them secured locations for their bases. You gave them access to your most secret defense data. You gave them access to your DNA and much more, and all just to quench your greed for power and information. The alien species, of course, quickly noticed that they were dealing with simple-minded creatures, and they gave you false and inferior information about their technology so that they receive much more out of the collaboration. In the last years of your 1970s and your early 1980s, it finally came down to various events between the alien species and that human government. I don't want to go into detail here, since there is much that even I am not exactly sure of. The whole thing lay in the context with some new, or better said, the old technical problems with your own self-constructed ships, whose camouflage and drive partially failed to function in test flights in the open. Because of that, the function of secrecy was threatened. Your military and your politicians slowly, very slowly, came to the conclusion after more than 20 years of this, that they had been deceived by that alien species. Multitudinous incongruities and the overstepping of bounds of the treaties by both sides finally led to an altercation between you and the extraterrestrials, which culminated in the liftoff of 3 of the alien aerial objects through a special, how do you say it, EMP, electromagnetic pulse, weapon, and a military skirmish at one of their underground installations. As a consequence of these attacks, the alien species ultimately withdrew from all contact with you, and was understandably more than angered about your kind. Therefore, I count these extraterrestrials among the 3 groups who are hostile towards you, and while the other 2 are more occupied with their own business, among them waging a cold war for dominance on your planet, your old friends and partners are preparing to supply themselves finally with the sole and absolute dominance over raw materials and human DNA. At the moment, it is probably true that they lack some of the technical possibilities and the large amount of forces which they need in order to achieve their goals directly. In spite of that, we are counting on negative actions, possibly ever of a more subtle kind, against you in the next few years or decades.
Oh, we had a fight underground, huh? And that time period, let's see here. What lines up with that time period? I'm thinking, could be wrong. There might be more. If there is, you guys let me know. But I'm thinking that in this instance, we're talking about the Dulce, New Mexico incident. You know, they had some misunderstandings and things kind of started going haywire with them and started shooting basically. And old dude got his hand blew off. Just a thought, you know? But yeah, like I said, if there's anything else that fits this description, let me know. Okay, now here we once again have another common theme coming up. We're just animals to them. And they think of us as ants. You know, Lacerta, yes. These even more highly intelligent beings, also yes. We're just animals to them. We're not important in the scheme of things.
Specifically, for the more highly developed species, there is simply, at the very least, your fate. You are animals for them, animals in a very large lab. Understandably, an alien intervention on your planet would disturb their projects, but I don't think that they accept a confrontation with other species for it. Many of them could look for another research planet for themselves, or they could study over a long distance your behavior and your consciousness, awareness, since crisis situations could have an attraction for their studies. Whenever you people take a look at an anthill, and another person comes along and steps on the anthill, what do? You go on your way, or you search for another anthill, or you observe the ants in their crisis condition. But would one of you, even though he were larger and more powerful than the one who stepped on the anthill in the first place, defend the meaningless ants? No. You have to imagine for yourself the viewpoint of the more highly advanced creatures. You are the ants. Don't expect any help from them.
Okay, get it. I get it. That's fine. You know, as far as highly intelligent animals go, I'm sorry. I'm not accepting of this as an answer. Because, one, if we're not important, if you don't have any interest, any vested anything in us, why even be here? Why not just treat it like Space Tijuana, roll up the windows and lock the doors on the UFO and keep trucking? Like, oh God, these guys are crazy. Deuces. You know, why not do that? Okay, so why even be here? Okay, natural resources. Okay, cool. Oxygen, water. Cool. All right. Comets are a thing. They're mostly ice and water, meteorites, and all that. You want to talk about natural resources? aren't we like making plans right now to get like some kind of asteroid that's, I don't know, made up of gold or something that's like worth zillions of dollars? You're telling me that the amount of natural resources that you want to take from us is potentially easier to do than just flying around and grabbing free space rocks? I'm not the best at math, okay? But as far as the concept goes, the math ain't mathin' on that. There's so many free space rocks out there. Just go get a space rock. You don't copper, okay, it's a big deal. Cool. Awesome. I'm pretty sure there's more of that out there than there is here. And that's not even going into count of like planets in the solar system, right? Like, how much copper does Mars or Jupiter have? You know, that's just our solar system. We got like what, 8 or 9 planets to choose from, plus the space rocks, like, and the moons. Like, yeah, I'm not buying it. You're omitting something here. There's something more going on. And then, once again, it's like, okay, you're gonna think of us so low, okay, but you know, the human species in and of itself might not be like the best representation of all the goodness in the universe or whatever, right? But, I don't know about you guys, but I really love my pets. I mean, my dog is essentially my kid. It's my little fur baby. It's, my real child's sibling. I'm pretty good to my dog. I'll spend a lot of money on that thing, and it's nowhere near as intelligent as a whale. I mean, granted, we don't do whales and dolphins the best. But if whales and dolphins could manipulate the world in the same way that we do with thumbs and whatnot, I mean, just speaking purely evolutionarily here. Okay, so if they were that much higher order and could do all those things, you're telling me that we wouldn't be treating them a little bit better right now? Like, we already treat them pretty good. I understand there's some bad stuff too, but they ain't got thumbs. Sorry, I'm on team people. I don't know what to tell you. But if they did, and if they could, we would essentially look at them as, I don't know, what, mermaids or something at this point? And we'd be out there trying to breed with them. Just like aliens do with us. Oh. See, this is what I'm saying. Like, just a little bit of logic here in these situations, and it don't take much. It's like, no, you're not telling me everything here. You're trying to. Let's think. How's a good way to put this? I guess in esoteric, funny terms, you're trying to jack our loosh, putting us down like this, right? Or you're trying to steal our joy. Like, no, you don't deserve to be happy. Go back to being the subservient ants that we want you to be. Come on, man. Like, the math ain't mathin'. You're being deceptive and you're being pretty mean on purpose. And it's like, why? Why? What? To what end? Who benefits? Who benefits? Ooh, that's always the question. Who benefits? Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
Generally speaking, a picture is all the more a fake, the clearer the outline and the colors are. because a levitating ship is generally hidden in a shifted field condition that even distorts the colors or the forms according to alignment. It might perhaps sound strange, but hazy and spectrally shifted photos are sometimes to be interpreted as an indication for a possibly authenticity. By the way, this object is floating above the water. If it were a genuine ship, we would have to see in any case either a trough or a swell on the surface. Since the surface is flat, it is obviously not a genuine ship. In my opinion, none of these three pictures show genuine objects in flight, or UFOs. Here in this picture I see above all no artificial object in flight. It seems much more to deal with only a light reflex in your simple optical cameras. You really ought to be intelligent enough not to fall for a mix-up like that. When your general public chases counterfeits and frauds for a long time, then they will presumably discover too late what is really going on in front of them, in their atmosphere. This one seems to be genuine. At least it displays the necessary characteristics. I would assign it at first glance to an alien species who have been visiting your planet for the last 35 years or so. The object itself is metallic and disc-shaped. Certainly it is distorted in form and color by means of a field effect. These 4 white and very long processes on the underside of the ship itself portray a kind of quasi-gravitational light manipulation. That is, the universal force field is being shifted in the direction of a simulated gravity. Actually, it is not a genuine light. It is mostly not a genuine light whenever you see illuminating UFOs, but a special, strongly charged form field which manifests itself in the space that matter inhabits as a quasi-light. The reason for the activation of this special high-energy system in an atmosphere is not completely clear to me. It's possible that it is a kind of investigating or influencing of the environment. In any case, it is terribly careless of that species to allow this technology to be photographed by humans. Well, I guess that most of you just plain don't understand it, and those who do will not say anything about it to the general public.
All right, back to the electromagnetic thing here, looking at the photos. So, once again, blurry photo equals good, according to Lacerta. It means electromagnetic radiation, that's a mouthful, is being emitted. Things are looking fuzzy. It's manipulating itself, starting to phase in or out, yada, yada. You get it. Blurry photo equals good, according to her. Neat. Okay, moving on. All right, so in this next part here, put yourself in the mind of Mr. EF. Sorry. All right, put yourself in the mindset of Mr. EF.
When, much to my surprise, I came across a cabin in the woods. In this cabin, I sensed a human consciousness awareness. It was EF, actually. I had no permission for contact with another species, but by the same token, I had set in place my mimicry capability quite successfully prior to this. Even with larger groups of you, I had never ever come across a human being when I was alone. Now let's call it primitive curiosity. I wanted to talk with the person in this cabin, and so I knocked on the door. E opened the door, and we got into an interesting conversation. His language was not quite yet common at that time for me. But it's not all that hard to learn a new language when one can read the information in the consciousness/awareness of the opposite individual. I simply told him that I came from a foreign country in the East. Of course, at the time, he did not really recognize who I was. He was totally convinced that he was talking with a creature of his own kind, although it was simply only a mimicry image. Since my assignment anyway had as its goal an investigation of this terrain, which was to last for several days, I visited him in this span of time 3 times as a human person. At first we talked mainly about really ordinary things. Later we got into religious and physical topics. He seemed to be impressed by my knowledge, and I was likewise impressed with his clear thoughts and his, for a human being, well-displayed personality structure, and his own opinions. You really like giving yourselves over completely to a public opinion or conditioning, as for example, reptilian species are evil, and stuff like that. I steered the conversation in this direction, and EF said something to the effect that he believed in alien species and that they did not have to necessarily be evil, but perhaps only different than his kind are. That pleased me. At that juncture of time, of course, I could not speak concretely with him about my knowledge because he wouldn't have believed me. He would have taken me for a human practical joker. I cultivated the very, very unusual idea for my kind to show him my true exterior, something that I did during our conversation at our 4th meeting in the cabin. Actually, he was predestined for contact. He was open-minded, honest, intelligent, not religiously inclined or conditioned. He lived alone and isolated, and no one would believe him should he decide to go public with his story.
Can you imagine the mental gymnastics that are going on in his head right now? Like, you're hanging out fairly secluded in your cabin in the woods. Okay? Knock on the door, and this pretty girl comes and wants to talk to you. And it's like, okay, like, what's going on? She keeps talking, and eventually she has like a general interest in you, and she keeps coming back, like every so often, like every couple of days or so, and it's like, has a general interest in you. It's like, okay, where's this going here? I've been in the woods here for a couple days and ain't seen a woman in I don't know how long. You seem real nice, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, I'm a lizard lady. It's like, whoa, I thought this was going a whole different route. I didn't know you were going to show me that. Whoa. Like, I thought something else was about to go down. All of a sudden, you're like, that? Man, I can't imagine what that would have been like. Poor feller. That would have been, rough.
I dared to take the step, but then I had serious doubt about the propriety of my act, especially when he reacted very violently. He got control of himself again after a time, and we could finally talk concretely about definite matters. Now he had no choice but to believe me.
Yikes. But on a different note, you remember how I mentioned earlier how angels have the tendency to be shapeshifters? And, if my theories are correct, which I know they are, but you don't have to believe me if you don't want to, yada, yada, you know the drill. It brings to mind that whole verse of being careful because you might be entertaining angels unaware. I mean, not the classical definition, but you might be entertaining half angels unaware. Yeah, no. And they got a lot of the same powers because they were taught by them what to do because it's their parents, or, originally at some point in time down that line or what have you. And then, I don't know, instead of having something that's like, be not afraid, I'm your friend, life is good, yada, yada, it's like, hey, I'm a space lizard lady that eats flesh. Where do we go from here? Like, shoot, lot lizards are scary enough. I can't imagine this kind of lizard showing up, you know what I mean? That's rough. Okay, now from here, it goes into a little bit of, mundane stuff like where she lives in Colony, and it all sounds interesting, and she brings up this whole column thing that talks and then says, it's religious significance and all that stuff, and it does all these other functions. And that's interesting, I don't know what there is to maybe glean from all that. There might be some interesting things with the numbers and all that. I don't know. Smarter people than me should look into that if they're interested. Once again, I will say that, remember, as far as religious significance, dragons, which means two things. Well, religiously dragons, so neat. We have a history of that. I mentioned that earlier too, didn't I? Yeah, anyways. But the other interesting point is dragons must have been a thing at one time. So, don't know. Pretty neat. Pretty neat. But the other thing that really cracks me up is this whole area designated for the production of animals. Now, what I will remind you guys is, remember, to them, we're animals. Red flag. And she only refers to it as flesh. So, super yikes. And then she goes and talks to him about, like, you were predestined for contact. You should come and see it. And he's like, oh, yeah, cool. Wait a second. I can only imagine, right? But wait, does that mean that I myself will be able to see it sometime?
Who knows, maybe.
Run away! Oh, yeah, cool. Wait a second. Does that mean I'm gonna go see it? Like, I'm pretty sure, like, that thought is rolling through his head. And he's like, oh, no! Oh, no! Oh, so yeah. Yeah. There's that. And from all this, there's a couple things that are not mentioned that I find interesting, and I want to bring it to y'all's attention. One thing that is interesting about the whole reptilian thing, anyways, is it's very much connected to the New Age, right? And as far as New Age beliefs go, one thing that I will point out that is never mentioned whatsoever at all is that nothing is mentioned about reincarnation. And then nothing is referred to about as a star seed. So, if those are things that you like and subscribe to, and you think that this is also real, yeah, well, you might want to have a little bit of a harder think on that. Or you can say, yeah, you know what? This is a fake interview. It never happened. This is possible. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I feel like I think it very easily could have happened. But just like my own CE5 experience with Lacerta, I wasn't allowed to remember everything in that conversation. And, I wonder if it's not the same case here. If he wasn't able to remember everything, or if, better yet, false memories and statements and all that stuff was given. I don't know. There's recordings and stuff like that, and it seems like recordings aren't safe to keep around, judging by the first interview and all. So who really knows? That's one of those things where it's up to you guys. What do y'all think? I think it's very interesting. And I would say, don't let this deceive you into making yourself so open that these things have legal right to come and mess with you. Be cautious. Look at this as what it is, interesting. And if there's things to get from it, to add to your arsenal, to add to your repertoire, or just general like knowledge on the subjects, do those things. But don't take it in so hard or heavy that it influences who you are as a person, because at the end of the day, the clear message that this thing shows ultimately is that not only it, but all the other aliens out there, they don't really care for you. They think of you as animals. And that's not what love is about. That's not what life is about. Be better. They're jealous of us. And there's a reason for that. And it's because of our capacity to love, ultimately. I mean, there's probably some more stuff too. I can do really cool tricks with like my finger. See how it's normal? And then, pew, that's cool. Oh, they're probably jealous of that too. I don't know. But yeah, guys, thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys maybe learned something. And yeah, I love you. So till we meet again. Tuki. Peace.
Greetings, humans. This is Lacerta speaking. I trust you've been keeping up with the Night's Watch, all episodes, of course. If not, the time to subscribe is now. Don't make me remind you again. We wouldn't want that, would we? Visit the channel for more insights. Your journey starts here. Don't miss it. These are my final words.